Hi, I'm County Commissioner Rob Gelder, and welcome to this episode of Commissioner's Corner. Today, we're going to hear about all things that are happening at the Port of Kingston. Joining me will be Commissioner Mary McClure and their Executive Director for the Port, Jim Farnick. So if you want to hear what's happening, stay tuned. Well, welcome to this episode of Commissioner's Corners. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch the show today, and I'm pretty excited to have Jim Farnick, who is the Executive Director for the Port of Kingston, along with Mary McClure, who is one of the Port Commissioners. So welcome very much to the show. I appreciate you taking the time to be part of it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, today I would really like to have an opportunity to share, have a conversation, share with the viewers kind of what's happening with the Port right now. I think there's lots of different things going on. You recently received a grant from the Community Economic Revitalization Board. We'll delve into that, maybe talk a little bit about the Washington Boulevard Park project, what's happening at the office, anything, soup to nuts. But whatever the Port's got going on, I'm sure our viewers want to hear about it. So
Great.
Why don't we dive into the CERB board, or Community Economic Development, Economic Revitalization Board, which that's why they call it CERB, because it's too much of a mouthful. So tell us, what was that grant? How did that come about?
CERB is a Washington state agency that really supports local jurisdictions in creating job opportunities for communities. And Commissioner Elliott, one of the other commissioners, wrote a grant last year, and we were awarded a $50,000 grant at the same time as actually the Port of Bremerton. Okay. And so CERB money is doing things in Kitsap County. You want to talk a little bit more about it?
Well, this is a really exciting step for the Port of Kingston, because it's taking us from, and we had a meeting this morning, a commission meeting, we were talking about how the Port of Kingston has been a marina and a park. Mm-hmm. And the community thinks of us as a marina and the park, but we're so much more than that. And this is taking us into the next realm, which is economic development. And I know we want to talk about that at a later time, but Commissioner Elliott had a vision that we had just recently purchased some property. There are 2 waterfront properties right next to our marina that were purchased by the Port. And we wanted to find out what was the viability of actually doing commercial development there. So we applied to CERB and met their criteria of a feasibility study. We did a request for proposals, and we awarded a contract to Heartland out of Seattle, which is it's a great firm. They're a real estate development firm, but they're also a planning firm. Mm. And they've led us through a process that's been pretty amazing. Part of that process involved community input, and that was a big component. The commissioners wanted to know, what does the community think of this? So I believe, Commissioner, you were at one of the sessions that we had. Great. We had close to 200 citizens come from Kingston, which is quite a turnout. We had two separate sessions. Our consultants reported back to us about 3 weeks ago on what their findings were. And then it's going to go into a next level of, okay, this is what the community said. This is what we can probably do, but is it commercially viable? I mean, does it make sense? So that process should be wrapped up here in the next 3 weeks. So again, it's exciting for us and exciting for the community to see how we can develop that property.
So were there any key learnings or ahas that came out of that process thus far, before you kind of ground truth them and test what's economically viable?
There were a few things that I don't know that they were completely startling, but they were really useful to see play out in conversation among people from Kingston. And the main one for me was, we all know that we don't really want to be Silverdale,
Mhm.
and we don't want to be South Lake Union. And, but we know that with the passenger ferry coming, there is going to be an influx of people. And in Kingston, there's mixed feelings about that, which I think
Sure.
is not very surprising. And I think my sense is that the whole commission and Jim got, as well as our consultants, got a really good understanding of kind of the complexity of that love-hate reaction to growth and change. And these properties are pretty amazing properties. They belong to old Kingston family, the Hill family. Dick Hill was the major driver behind the marina, so this is really kind of historic, special place. And it shows to everyone. If you live across the bay, if you drive past it all the time, it's a really very special part of Kingston. And hearing people talk with some nostalgia, some hope, and I think really captured a lot of the essence of what we recognize is our responsibility to use these properties in a way that really does them justice and does the community justice.
Yeah, I mean, for me, the aha moments, and I've been in development a long time, but these are residential properties on the waterfront, adjacent to pretty much a recreational facility. So the ideas of what do you do to these properties? Certainly you have the homeowners that are around it saying, not in my backyard. You're having the people that say we need job creation. We need to support the passenger ferry and the influx of people there. So we heard it all and trying to sort through that, figure out what the best solution is. From my point of view, the commissioners have been very together on this, that the property has to be used for economic development. If it doesn't make sense for us to own it, and we probably should flip it and move on, because our mission is economic development, and these properties have to go to work for the community.
Yeah. Well, go ahead.
I think part of the issue around economic development in Kingston is that too many people think of economic development as, let's build a Walmart. Let's build a big office building that's at least 10 stories tall. And in reality, just bringing people closer to downtown is economic development for Kingston and for the kinds of businesses that a lot of people want to start and or keep going across the winter. And so I think I got a really good understanding of how people think about economic development so that we can continue the conversation with the community in the future.
So I would think that would be a tough challenge, right? So you ask for input from the community, you get that, and then you have this delicate dance of managing expectations. I mean, you mentioned sort of not in my backyard, kind of that terminology, because people's visions diverge and they're not necessarily always aligned, because some folks are in a community want to see it exactly the way it is today, and that's just the way it should be. And then there's change is the only constant in life, and it's going to. So how do you manage that, or have you talked about kind of managing that expectation as you move forward in this process and the visioning?
I think our first task is to hold off making a decision. And I think everyone who was at many of the people that were at the community meetings assumed that we would be taking whatever report we get and saying, A, no, B, no, C, yes, let's do C. And in fact, I think the whole process has been more informing our decision-making process. And we haven't really started talking through what should happen with that property until we get those findings. I think they're going to be a good kickoff for our conversation.
And I think the goal is not for the port to develop. It would be to find a developer for that. So in fact, you would need to set up a scenario where a developer could come in and actually feel that they could make this work. We had a lot of people say we need more parks. And that's kind of a non-starter because I love parks, and we manage one of the biggest parks in the area. But these parks or these parcels have to go to work, like I said. There were some interesting ideas that came out, some low impact ideas that I hadn't thought of and said, wow, that's actually a neat idea. And one was putting 25 little cottages, little 200 square foot tiny houses on it in a little village environment where people could rent them on a nightly basis. So it allows us to do economic development through tourism. It allows us to utilize the property in a low impact way. It brings people into town to go to our restaurants and shops. So that was one of the things that I hadn't thought about that was pretty good.
Kind of fun.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's the interesting thing about having community involvement. You just never know where those gems are going to kind of pop up and
Right.
people's ideas. So what's next then? So you've got the grant, you did some of the initial community involvement, you received that first kind of report back from the consultants, but next steps, are they doing more work or?
We haven't contracted with them to do anything beyond
Okay.
the initial report. And I think really where that heads us in terms of what we get out of it, I think will really determine where we go. Because the suggestions were as wide as literally office buildings, Kingston Museum. And one of the constants we did here was waterfront access, beach access, waterfront access. So I think that, although again, exactly how that package comes together is not yet known, but I think that's I heard that loud and clear.
Yeah. Now we are about 60% through their contract, so we still have 40% to go.
Okay.
So now that they've come to us with concepts, they're going to go to the marketplace and test those concepts. They'll go to developers and say, this is an idea, what do you think? And they're going to report back what the business community has to say about those ideas. And then they will test that through an economic model. So if we build a hotel, for instance, or if we do this, what can we expect? So the commissioners, by the end of May, is their date when they'll be finished completely, we'll have a pretty good idea not only of ideas, but will they work, and is there anybody interested in doing that here in Kingston?
So you kind of touched on a point that public-private partnership, where government entities, municipal corporations really can't be all things to all people. So how do you kind of leverage those opportunities to do that? Do you think there's folks out there that are willing to kind of take a look at it and give you their thoughts?
Yeah.
That's good.
Heartland was very encouraging about the probability of there being good community building and also to investors profitable things to do. I think the public-private partnership that we've started talking about is very much recognizes the ports were organized to do economic development or empowered to do economic development with access to financial resources that the private sector doesn't have. And so that means that we can enable a really great idea, help finance it, and then allow the right people to take it from there. So.
Yeah, my idea of economic development, people talk about job creation, and I personally don't believe government creates jobs. I believe that government creates infrastructure to allow the private sector to create jobs and be successful. And that's what model that ports use throughout the state. I've been doing this for close to 20 years now, and creating the infrastructure so that a business can come in, and maybe they don't want to buy that $1 million piece of property, but they want to build a $1 million building, and they want a 50-year land lease. That's what ports do. They put in the infrastructure, do a 50-year land lease, and let the developer be successful.
So kind of touch on it. So we kind of dove right into this study, but maybe probably an opening question would have been, so from your perspective, what is economic development? What does that mean to the port? Because I'm sure every port does it a little bit differently. We Heaven knows we have a lot of port districts in Kitsap County, but what does it mean thus far for the Port of Kingston?
You want to take it? You want
No,
me to?
you go first, and then I get to fill in.
You know, and you hit it right on the head. Every port has a different idea what economic development is. The best thing a port can do is size economic development to its community. So what's good for Kingston isn't good for Silverdale or isn't good for Bremerton. And we're sensitive to that. I still believe that this town has a potential for tourism, even though a lot of people will say it's not a tourist town, and I understand that. But there are some elements that we can do on the waterfront to develop that and nurture that, where that might not be the same in Bremerton. So to me, economic development means exactly what we said before, is creating an environment where people can come in and invest in our community and hire people.
Anything to add to that?
The piece that I would add is that I think whatever that investment is, whatever the end result is, I'm hopeful is fits Kingston and makes Kingston, if this makes any sense to you, even more itself than it is today.
Sure.
Yeah, so. Yeah.
Kind of culturally connected
Yeah.
to the space. Now, I think the other thing, I want to kind of shift topics, but before we do, and we'll put it up, the website address at the end of the program, but is there a place where if folks want to learn more about the work with CURB thus far, the CURB funded project to date, where would they go?
Right on our homepage of our website, www.portofkingston.org.
Okay.
There is a separate page for CURB. It has a survey that comes back to the commission so they can read people's comments. It also has the intro documents that have been generated to date and some of the ideas that are out there floating around. So it's a pretty comprehensive page that people can actually, it's an interactive page so people can comment right there, and the commissioners will know. One of the pieces of the puzzle that we didn't talk about, and it's probably in my mind one of the most important, is the old Dickinson site. So we decided to include a third piece of property in that feasibility study, which is where Dickinson's restaurant used to be, which is right above the park. And in my mind, that's probably one of the most valuable pieces of property in all of Kingston. You know, it's 1 acre right on Mike Wallace Park overlooking the marina. And it screams for something that's service related. You know, it needs to be an Anthony's or it needs to be something that's a destination.
Right.
And a lot of the community think it should be a small boutique hotel. You know, 20 rooms overlooking the marina. So there's been a lot of talk. They've talked about a hotel for 20 years probably. It's finding a developer who wants to take that risk. But it's a beautiful site.
Definitely well positioned.
Right.
So.
And I think I just want to make sure that viewers recognize that there have been 2 restaurants right there at the ferry dock. One was the old Kingston Inn, which was across the street, basically where the park is now. And then this that is closer to on the port side. And yes, it is a magic location. I have heard so many people talk about going over to Edmonds to have a meal because it's an outing, and people from Edmonds saying, I used to come to Kingston for a meal. Yeah.
Yeah, I can just imagine being in the boutique hotel overlooking Mike Wallace Park at Christmas time with the lights down there. That would be magical.
It would be.
So Mary, you brought up the park, and so why don't we just segue right into that, where Washington Boulevard Park. So I'm not sure if our viewers know kind of how that came to be, that the port owns that now, but if we could talk a little bit about maybe how it came to be and sort of what some of the thoughts are for moving forward.
So the it's the site of the old Kingston Inn. When it burned down, they decided not to rebuild. It was bought by a local resident who, in fact, gifted it to the port, the piece of property, for park purposes in perpetuity. So with that, we applied for a grant with RCO, the Recreation Conservation Organization, and were successful in achieving a $400,000 grant from RCO
Fantastic.
to redevelop that park. Our plan was to have that done actually this summer. And at the same time, our friends at the county were planning to implement phase 1 of Complete Streets, which is a great program. And Tim Beachy and I from Public Works have kind of really got together and kindred spirits almost, have the same vision. And we were going down a road and they were going down a road, and we met one day and said, you know, why don't we just calm down and let's see how we can develop Washington Boulevard together. And then of course Washington Department of Transportation came in and said, we're looking at all sorts of changes to the ferry booth and that in that intersection. So we brought them in. And then of course Kitsap Transit said, well, wait a minute, we have buses that are going to come to the passenger ferry. So now we've created this group of people that are working together for one common goal.
Great.
And so I'm really excited about it. And RCO was kind enough to give me a 1-year extension on my grant. So we have an extension until the end of next year. I know the county is moving forward on Washington Boulevard. Thank you for the funding or help with that funding. And John Clausen is really excited about what Kitsap Transit can bring to the table. So we're in planning and engineering right now. Matter of fact, we had a meeting last week and we decided to just put the 2 engineers together and let them talk, because they were talking elevations and all sorts of things that were a little beyond me.
Let the engineers do what they do.
Yeah. But what's going to be interesting is it's really going to be a park, I believe, for people who are waiting in the ferry line. I'm not sure that the locals are going to use this park. But if I was waiting in line with 3 or 4 kids in the car and I had an hour to wait for a ferry, I'd send them up to the park. We have a beautiful 25-foot gazebo that's going to be in the middle of it. We're plumbing it for a water feature for splash pools. And I can't wait to see the parents when their kids come back to the car dripping wet. But it's really going to be a beautiful park overlooking the ferry terminal.
Very cool. Very cool.
You know, I also want to comment that the impact that a single person can make. The donor who bought this and basically said, this is what I want to see done with it, was also a significant donor to this community center here in Kingston, which has been a real cornerstone of kind of the next chapter in Kingston's life. And I'm consistently grateful to that family's intention to make Kingston a better place. So.
No, it's definitely a wonderful gift and a blessing to our community. But it's kind of, on some level, you take a step back and the bequest or the gift with sort of determining how it's to be used in perpetuity. And we just had a conversation about other properties that the port owns, and ports aren't necessarily in the business of parks. So there's, how do you get your heads around sort of the nexus of what this park that you now are the owner and steward of in perpetuity, how does that fit with the overall mission of the port?
In my mind, public access to waterfront property is a mission of the port.
Okay.
So this is basically public access around transportation hubs. I think one of the reasons we were successful in getting a $400,000 grant was the port has proven itself to be good stewards of parks. When you look around at what we've created, what we've maintained, RCO said this is the right agency to be doing this, and so it was natural.
Great, cool. Now I know there's other things in the works for down at Mike Wallace Park and the port office, and you kind of bursting at the seams, don't have enough room to work down there. Can you tell our viewers a little bit about kind of what's coming on the horizon there?
Sure.
So one comment is, for anyone that hasn't been in the Port of Kingston offices, you can't hear yourself think, I don't know how you get the work done that you do, because it is 5 or 6 people crammed into a very small space with no walls, no soundproofing, et cetera. So your initiative to expand the port, the office, I think was a surprise to the commissioners, and perfect. So.
I think that a lot of people think I'm doing it for me and my staff, and I'm really not. When I came to the Port of Kingston a year ago this week, by the way,
Oh, happy anniversary.
the first thing I thought about was I'm a real proponent of handicapped access. I have friends who are handicapped, and I looked at a office that you had to come check in on the second floor, going, well, how are these people going to get up there? And then I saw our aging population trying to stumble up the stairs to get up to my office. And I said, this just isn't going to work. So what we're going to do is we're going to put all of customer service on a lower level. It'll be fully ADA accessible. You can roll a wheelchair right into the office and get any information for tourist activities or check in your boat. We're going to put my office upstairs, but I can certainly come down and meet with people on the lower level. And we're going to have a conference room for the commissioners. Right now, the commissioners really can't meet with constituents anywhere. They go to a coffee shop to meet with constituents, and that's been fine, but I think we've elevated to a port now where we need more interaction at a professional level. So that will be upstairs along with our accounting services. But I'm really doing this whole thing so that we are fully accessible to anyone in the community.
Excellent.
So it's going to be nice. It's not going to be very big. The extension's only 900 square feet. It's going to be one-story shed roof that'll come out into Mike Wallace Park. Matter of fact, if you go down there now, you'll see white lines in the grass that where the outline's going to be. And the other thing is we want to extend a nice patio area, because another initiative that you're very familiar with is the Adirondacks Chair Initiative. And I would like to put 2 very, very large Adirondacks chairs out there in front of the port offices for people to enjoy and sit and look at the waterfront.
That's a bit of a spoiler alert. We'll maybe do another program about that sometime down the road. But so I just know that having attended some port commissioner meetings there, it's quite cramped when you're trying to, as you talk about, everybody kind of working in that space, and your meetings are in the middle, and sort of that makes it tough to really, I think, have. It's a great initiative, especially the accessibility component to it. I think the port being accessible and available, whether you're otherly abled or just needing to have that space to sit down and deal with those issues face to face, I think is great. So it's obvious that there's lots of things happening with the Port of Kingston and initiatives coming down the pike. And I wish we had more time. Unfortunately, the BCAT only gives me a certain amount of time to do these programs. So, but any kind of final thoughts that you might have that you want, that maybe something popped up for you that we didn't talk about that you really want to share with our viewers today?
I am so excited about what we're getting ready to do, what we're doing, about the fact that the port is delivering, making promises that we're delivering on, that we have a strong staff in place that is experienced and really knows what they're doing, and really enables the port commissioners to figure out, well, what should we be doing, and asking those questions and not being quite so far down in the weeds. And I think when I hear people in town say, oh yeah, the port, who's that new guy? And then that's the new guy. It is heartening, because you have made such a difference in the accessibility, not just physical, of the port to the whole community. And I see it in so many different ways. The fact that we're doing replacement of our covered moorage, that we're doing this project, that project, because there are 6 other little projects that we haven't talked about, and they're all happening, they're happening on time, they're happening well, and with imagination, and making it even a more beautiful place to live.
Excellent. Jim, any final thought?
Just the fact that people who think they know the Port of Kingston really should come down and really talk. Because we are in the next phase with the Port of Kingston and how we're going to develop, and it's exciting.
Excellent. So looks like that's an open invitation to come back and do another program, because
Absolutely.
There's obviously things we didn't touch on and more to come. So thank you both for taking the time to be part of this episode of Commissioner's Corner. I very much appreciate it, and thank you all for watching. I hope you learned a lot. And again, check out the portofkingston.org, I believe is the website, for more information, and you can always contact them if you have questions. So thanks a lot, and see you next time.